Hey, what's going on, everyone? So right now we're going to get into parole and probation, quote unquote, Meek Mill edition. So what I do advise is that you check out the link in the syllabus with the video of Meek Mill talking about his case. You'll also have a Vox article, so kind of just to generalize, Meek Mill caught a charge when he was still a juvenile. Basically, when he got hit with the charge, they try to stick him with like 19 charges ranging from like, just trying to distribute drugs to conspiracy to things of that nature, but he ended up just getting hit with the gun charge. At the time, he was given 10 years probation, which seemed like a slap on the wrist. But one thing about being on supervision is that certain things that are not considered to be crimes are considered violations while you're on community supervision. So whether that's having a curfew or having police contact, even if it's not necessarily anything in regards to you, but let's say you just had police contact in general, like cops are stopping and frisking people, and that's just what they do, for quotas and stuff like that. Once your parole officer or probation officer finds out, that could automatically be a violation of your, supervision. So we're going to get into some of the statistics, but basically Meek Mill's situation was just a situation that got highlighted on the national level because he's a celebrity. If he wasn't a celebrity, he wouldn't have gotten as much attention, of course. When he violated, he ended up getting thrown into a facility to basically do some time, which, of course, the whole purpose of parole and probation is for you to be, quote unquote, employed and to be, productive members of society. He got violated because he popped a wheelie on stage, which, a lot of people would argue, that's not really something that they would think somebody could get violated over. But basically, once you're working and things of that nature, that's supposed to be the whole purpose of being under supervision. But in his case, that's part of his job to entertain people. And he was doing this on stage during a concert, I believe it was. And, he ended up being violated. So let's share the screen real quick. Excuse me. So if we're talking about community supervision, because oftentimes we think about just the people who are, the people that are behind bars. But one thing that isn't mentioned necessarily are the people that are under supervision. So as of the current statistics, over 2.3 million people are behind bars, but the numbers that's not necessarily looked at are the people under supervision, whether it be parole, probation. In total, you're estimating about 4.5 million adults are under community supervision. So when you add all of it together, you have close to 7 million people who are under correctional control, right? In Meek Mill's case, his probation was revoked because of that situation that he went through. Usually it takes, like I said, a violation of, your curfew or, maybe even testing positive for some kind of controlled substance. That can easily put you back into the correctional facility or put you in one. Some of the states ranging from, who uses the most probation and parole in general could range from the top being Georgia, Pennsylvania, Idaho, Ohio, and you see that for the most part, probation tends to be the most used form of correctional supervision. A lot of that has to do with the fact that prisons and jails are overcrowded. That's the reason why probation and parole were formed, because we actually incarcerate people at a faster rate than we build facilities. So there's not enough people to incarcerate, so we have to keep people under supervision. We can see that when it comes to other forms of punishment, whether it be federal prison rates or local jail rates, Obviously, it varies from one state to the next, but there's not necessarily a dramatic change, such as when you're looking at the probation population. Probation, in a lot of cases, is viewed as an opportunity to stay in the community while still being under supervision. Now, probation for juveniles, it may be treated differently than probation for adults. Adults, you can still see on their record whether or not they have the offense. Where juveniles, it may or may not be seen. Parole, definitely you are going to be able to know that the person was, incarcerated at some point, because parole, you only get it once you're already incarcerated. So parole usually is when you already served a certain amount of your sentence. So if you have a 5-year bid and you only had to do, well, I'm not going to say only, but you had to do 85% of it because it was a violent offense, then you probably spent close to 4 years behind bars, and then the rest of it you get to do it out in the community. Usually you could transition to a halfway house, or they find that there's reason for you to skip the halfway house and you can just go straight into employment or whatever. They'll allow you to do that, but that's that could be hit and miss for a lot of people. Testing positive, like I said, for smoking marijuana or doing other kinds of drugs that can send you back to prison, or get you to end up being in jail if you're on probation. Every state handles their population very differently. New York is at the bottom when it comes to using probation specifically, but it's also at about the same rate when it comes to some of the other statistics as well. Let's see. Typical problems that are involved with probation specifically is paying supervision fees. So once you're on parole and or probation, you have to actually pay for your officer to supervise you, essentially. So you're basically paying for your own babysitter. I know in New York, if you're on parole, it's like $30 a month. That fee may or may not be waived depending on the situation. Oftentimes, we know that people just coming home, they don't necessarily find a job, within even the first week, first month, maybe even the first year of them being home. So oftentimes it does get waived. But the reality is that if you're on supervision, you have to pay fees, number one, for being supervised, but then you also have to pay fees such as restitution and any other fees that the court system may feel you owe them and things of that nature. What's it called? If you signed the waiver to be on parole, then you probably most likely had to also sign a waiver to go into a program, whether it be a drug abuse program, whether it be something for job readiness. You probably had to sign that in order to qualify for parole and or probation. The reality is that a lot of people do violate their supervision because they find that it's easier for them to just finish the rest of their time behind the wall than for you to actually be in the community trying to figure it out. And, there's validity to it because imagine an officer being able to intrude on your personal space at any moment, basically whenever they decide that, they could just walk in. So the thing about being under supervision is that if you're living with other people, let's say with your grandmother or your wife or your significant other or whatever, not only is your space violated, but their space is violated as well. And so that makes for a very difficult dynamic. Unless the people that you're living with are very understanding of your situation, this could be something that obviously affects and annoys the rest of the people in your household. Let's see. Black Americans are subject to disproportionate rates of correctional control and higher revocation rates. Black Americans make up 30% of those under community supervision, but just 13% of the U.S. adult population. So again, we see the statistic where The Black community is overrepresented in a specific category of the criminal justice system. Okay, so I'm going to go into this article right here. You have 1 in 55 adults is on probation or parole. So it's kind of just showing you that the odds of you bumping into somebody who's under correctional supervision is pretty likely. In New York, 1 in every 109 adults is under community supervision. And these are some of the rates from 2016. In New Jersey, 1 in every 45 adults is under community supervision. 1 in every 35 in Pennsylvania. Florida, 1 in every 75. Texas, you have 1 in every 43. And Texas is a pretty big state. 1 in every 90 in California. And of course, you could just go throughout some of the other states and have a general sense as well. 9 things you probably didn't know about parole. So life sentences doesn't necessarily mean life. Unless you're sentenced to life without parole, people serving life sentences are eligible for parole eventually. So, you know, whether it gets approved or not, that's a different conversation. But technically, that's basically what the stance is. Some of the other 9 facts that they're stating here, I'm not necessarily sure why they're there. Like, some of these things are pretty straightforward, but the one that did jump out to me was if you are a farmer, auto salesperson, executive, or personal fitness trainer, you too can be on a parole board. So if you're behind bars and you basically qualify for parole and you would like to plead your case as to why you should be let on parole, the people that are on the board are not necessarily criminal justice experts. They probably don't even have a background in criminal justice, and basically they get to decide whether you get to go back to the community or not. So, you know, that's a side that people don't really know, but it's something that has to be understood. The criminal justice system obviously is not necessarily all the way thought out through in regards to like how certain things are handled. And last year, unfortunately, we experienced, you know, as a people and as a culture, the death of Nipsey Hussle. He was shot and killed right in front of his store. But unfortunately, he was shot and killed because he was trying to assist somebody who just came home from doing 20 plus years in prison. Basically, the individual linked up with Nipsey Hussle so that Nipsey can give him some clothes to get him back into the community. But what ended up happening was the person that linked up with Nipsey, he got shot in the situation as well. Nipsey was shot, he was killed, but the other person that Nipsey was there for, he got shot, but he ended up surviving. Basically, he had violated his parole as a result of getting shot. And not just necessarily getting shot, but the fact that he was around a quote-unquote known gang member in Nipsey Hussle. Even though Nipsey was an artist and he was more of an entrepreneur in the eyes of the public, he was still considered to be a gang member because of his past affiliation with the Rolling 60s Crips. Kerry Lathan, 56 years old, he basically ended up getting shot in the situation, and even though he didn't do anything per se on his end, he basically was hit with a violation of his parole. So they tried to incarcerate him and throw him back in prison while he basically was handcuffed while he was in the hospital bed. And while you have LAPD stating, oh my God, we wish, you know, this didn't happen. We were supposed to meet up with Nipsey Hussle to talk about how to prevent youth from joining gangs and things of that nature. While this is happening, on the other side, you got the person Nipsey was trying to help, basically getting arrested and borderline violating his parole. So that kind of touches based on parole and probation. Probation is usually given to juveniles as an alternative to incarceration, and also for misdemeanor offenses, it doesn't make sense to keep somebody in jail, overcrowding the space if you can just put them on community supervision. They usually have to have a GPS monitor, you know, attached to their ankle, where parole is basically once you're in prison, specifically prison, because prison is for offenses that are a year or more. Once you serve a certain amount of your time, usually the majority of your time, you qualify for parole, which means you can come home and finish the rest of your sentence outside, going to school, you know, starting your own business or working for somebody. But of course, it gets complicated. Now, parole officers, the ones that I've, you know, had to collaborate with when I worked in the halfway house, they generally are pretty flexible. If you're out here at least looking to work and things of that nature, if you're not looking to work or, you know, you're taking your time, of course, they're probably just going to be, you know, they're gonna respond to you in a more negative fashion. But at least from what I've seen, you know, there is a level of, you know, let's see how we could work this out. Parole officers usually, if somebody's homeless coming out into the community, they will put them into a shelter or something of that nature. There are parole officers who obviously, you know, step out of line in regards to their authority and their boundaries. Just like any officer or any position of power, there's always people that look to go that extra mile of just like violating somebody. But from what I've seen, a lot of parole officers, if you test positive for weed, for example, the first time, even the second time, they're not going to violate you. They'll put you in a program so that way you can still be out here and, you know, basically find ways to establish yourself. An officer generally has a caseload of like, they can have a caseload of 30 people to 100 people. And if you're working in a lot of cases and you can provide pay stubs, or if you're going to school and you can provide your school schedule, the officer will probably check in on you like once a month. Because since they have so many people from different areas of the city, they have to coordinate, okay, on this day, I'm going to go to this section of this city. On this day, I'm going to go to this section. So they have to be very precise with their scheduling. And if you're doing what you need to do and you provide, for example, enough pay stubs, like 2 or 3 pay stubs to show, yeah, you're consistently working, because a pay stub will come in maybe like every 2 weeks, then that's all they pretty much need. They'll just pass through, you know, make sure that the living conditions is still okay. There's no drugs in the house, no whatever. And then they'll let you go about your day. But if you're somebody that's in a program, like in the halfway house or something of that nature, then, you know, they'll check in on you more often. And as long as you're in the program going, you know, clocking in and, you know, sitting in during the groups and stuff like that, like they're fine with that as well. In a lot of cases, as long as it's leading towards something. So, yeah, this is pretty much it in regards to parole and probation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I'd be glad to answer any questions. So have a good one in the meantime and take care.